My name is Renee Callahan. I'm 35, and on the day I got married, I stood beside a three-tier cake and counted 4 chairs that never got sat in. One had my father's name stitched onto the ribbon. One had my mother's. One belonged to my younger sister, Paige. The last one was reserved for Marisol, the woman who'd been my closest friend since we were 15 years old, sharing a locker and swapping lunches. All 4 of them were, at that exact moment, 40 minutes across town at a party my mother had thrown together, an engagement celebration for Paige, scheduled, deliberately or not, for the very same afternoon as my wedding. I had the cake knife in my hand. My husband's fingers were wrapped around mine, warm and steady, and then my phone lit up on the table beside the flowers. My mother's name. A text, "Call me." No. This is serious. Then the phone started ringing. It didn't stop. By the time the first slice hit the plates, I had 36 missed calls sitting on my screen. I didn't answer one of them. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that backyard 3 towns over understood, was that a document with my name on it had been sitting quietly in a county records office for 3 years, waiting for someone to finally read it. This is that story. Stay with me, because those 4 empty chairs are about to mean something none of us saw coming. To understand why those chairs stayed empty, you have to understand who I'd always been inside my own family, because it explains everything that came after. I work as a hospice nurse. I sit with people during the last chapters of their lives, and if you do that long enough, you start to notice something. Families reveal their truest selves at the edges, in the quiet, unglamorous moments nobody's filming. In my family, I was the edge. I was the one who got the call when the water heater burst at 11 at night. I was the one who untangled my father's prescriptions when the pharmacy mixed up his dosage. I was the one who opened the property tax envelope nobody else wanted to touch. Paige was the one people called to celebrate. That wasn't a complaint, not really. It was just the climate we'd all grown up breathing. I stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. And here's the part one have to be honest about, because it isn't flattering. My flaw was never weakness. It was that I carried things quietly and told no one, and then called that strength. So when it came time to plan my own wedding, I kept the guest list small and told myself it was simplicity. My husband, Theo, asked once why I hadn't invited more people from my side. I gave him an answer I only half believed at the time. If they want to be there, they'll come. He squeezed my hand and let the subject go. I drove the invitation out to my parents' place myself instead of mailing it, the kind with the satin ribbon and the good cardstock. I told myself that was devotion. Looking back, it was a test, and some quiet part of me already suspected how it would end. There was something buried in my past from 3 years earlier, something I hadn't let myself think about in a long time, that was about to come roaring back into the light. But that week, all I wanted was for the people I loved to actually be in the room. My parents' house sits at the end of a long gravel driveway my grandfather laid by hand, out past the edge of town. I grew up on that land. When I pulled up with the invitation, my mother, Diane, was on the porch with her planning binder open on her lap, and she didn't look up right away. "Renee," she said, like my arrival had slipped her mind entirely. I held out the invitation. She took it, set it directly on top of the binder without opening it, and kept talking about Paige, about how Paige's future mother-in-law wanted to do something proper, something that honored the occasion the way it deserved. I realized halfway through that she was quoting somebody else's praise of her own daughter's choices, and somehow wearing it like her own achievement. My father, Walt, sat wrapped in a blanket in the corner of the porch. The stroke he'd had 3 years earlier had taken the strength from his right side, and something else too. Some willingness to hold my gaze for more than a second. "Hey, Dad," I said. He nodded at the porch railing instead of at me. I asked my mother if she had the wedding date locked in correctly. She waved a hand. Of course, but she never wrote it in the binder. She wrote everything in that binder. I watched her not write it down, and felt something cold and familiar settle behind my ribs, the feeling that says, "You are not the headline here, and you never will be." Driving home, I told myself I was overreacting. Mothers don't skip their own daughters' weddings. That isn't a thing that actually happens. I said that out loud to my empty car. And then I caught myself because somewhere underneath the denial I already knew, in this particular house, it absolutely was a thing that happened. To understand the empty chairs, You need to go back 3 years, to the spring that broke everything open. My father's stroke hit in March. While he was still in the hospital, a letter arrived from the bank. The mortgage on the farm was 90 days past due, and the word foreclosure sat printed in bold at the top like it was proud of itself. My parents had been quietly sinking for 2 years and had told absolutely no one, not even me. The number to bring everything current, with the legal fees stacked on, came to just over $84,000. I was 31. I had exactly that much sitting in a savings account. I'd built one exhausting double shift at a time since nursing school, money that was supposed to become a down payment on my someday house. Instead, I sat in a hospital parking garage and made the decision in about 4 minutes. I would save the farm. My grandfather had built it with his own hands. My father was upstairs, unable to lift his own arm. I couldn't let them lose the one thing that had outlasted every hardship before it. But I didn't just hand the money over quietly. That detail matters, so hold on to it. Even in that parking garage, even with my father 2 floors above me fighting for his life, some careful, self-protective part of me understood a hard truth about my family. A gift, in this house, would be remembered the way water remembers a stone dropped into it, which is to say, not at all. So I did something my mother would later call cold. I did it properly on paper with a lawyer, and I told absolutely no one. 3 years later, in a living room crowded with relatives, every person who'd skipped my wedding would find out exactly what that paperwork said. But that spring, all I felt was the isolating weight of being the only one who'd actually shown up. Paige's engagement arrived like a holiday that had been declared without a vote. My mother called me at the hospital, something she almost never did, and I ducked into a supply closet, certain something was wrong. "Paige is engaged," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Tyler proposed at the lake. We're thinking of throwing something." "Congratulations," I told her, and I meant it. "Paige is my sister. I was there the day she came home from the hospital as a newborn." Then my mother said the sentence I would carry into every room for the next 2 months. "You'll understand, Renee. A wedding's just one day. Family is about who actually shows up for each other." I stood there with the smell of antiseptic in my nose and didn't say anything for a moment. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "Oh, you know what I mean," she said in that tone she always used when she meant the cruel thing precisely and wanted credit for not saying it outright. She wanted me to understand the ranking. My wedding, a party. Paige, family. I'd heard the hierarchy my whole life in smaller doses, but never spelled out that cleanly. I told her I had to get back to a patient, true, and hung up with my hand pressed flat against a shelf of gauze. A man was dying 2 rooms down, and his own daughter hadn't visited in over a week. I'd watched her miss the window the night before. You don't get these afternoons back, I thought. You think you do. You think family waits for you. Then I walked back out and held a stranger's hand while, 40 minutes away, my own family was busy planning a party engineered to outrank my vows. Marisol and I had been inseparable for 19 years. She'd agreed to be my maid of honor back in the spring, quick and warm, the way she said yes to everything. So I didn't think twice calling her about the final dress fitting. There was a pause on the line. I know Marisol's pauses. This one had a door behind it. "About that," she said. "I might have a conflict that weekend." "What kind of conflict?" I kept my voice light. She got vague, and with Marisol, vague was never actually vague. It was a warning. Something about family obligations that weren't technically hers. A party she'd gotten kind of roped into. It took a beat too long for it to click. "Marisol." "Whose party?" Another pause. Paige reached out. "Your mom called me too, actually." My mother had gone down my own guest list and personally recruited my best friend. That detail is what actually landed. Not that Marisol had been tempted by a bigger party, though she clearly had been. It was that my mother had worked through the names one by one, pulling each person toward Paige's afternoon like a tide going out. "It's the same day as my wedding," I said. Silence. She genuinely hadn't known. Or she'd let herself not know, which is its own kind of choice. "I didn't realize," she said, and we both heard exactly how thin that sounded. I told her I had to go. I don't usually cry over things like this. I save my tears for what's actually worth crying over, and sitting in the bridal shop parking lot, I was already starting to suspect this wasn't one of them. I just did the math, quietly, on who would actually be standing in the room when I said my vows. I found out the actual date from my cousin, of all people. She texted me a photo with no caption, a cream-colored invitation. Please join us to celebrate the engagement of Paige and Tyler. The date matched my wedding. The start time was 1 hour before my ceremony began. I called my mother and kept my voice as level as I could manage. Mom, Paige's party is the same day as my wedding. Is it? She said, and I've spent a lot of nights since wondering if she genuinely expected me to believe that. We just couldn't make the calendars work, honey. Tyler's family is only in town that one weekend. I told her there were 51 other weekends in the year. She sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a woman being asked to perform an unreasonable task, like attending her own daughter's wedding. Then she said we can't split the family in two directions in one weekend, Renee. People shouldn't have to choose. It isn't fair to make them. As if I were the one who'd built the fork in the road. As if she hadn't constructed it herself and then handed me the blame for the traffic jam. I stood in my kitchen and felt something inside me go very quiet and very clear. I wasn't going to argue. Arguing is something you do when you still believe the other person might move. Okay, Mom, I said. I hope it's a beautiful party. She softened instantly, the way people who've been pushing suddenly do the moment you stop resisting. You're being so mature about this, she said. I hung up before she could hear me laugh, because I wasn't sure I'd have been able to stop. That night, Theo found me at the kitchen table with the seating chart, sliding place cards around like I could summon people out of card stock through sheer will. He sat down across from me and didn't speak for a while. Theo's good at that. Finally, do you want to move the date? I'd already thought about it, obviously. I could bend the whole wedding around their calendar, make sure not a single chair sat empty, prove once more that I was the flexible one, the one who folds so the family never has to break. I'd done that my entire life. I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Not anger. Relief. No, I said. If they want to come, they'll come. If they don't, at least I'll hear the answer clearly. Theo reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Then we get married Saturday, he said, and we have the best day of our lives, and we let them miss it. I wish I could tell you that decision felt powerful in the moment. It didn't, not yet. It felt like setting down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten my arm could hang straight at my side. We pulled the 4 names off the chart. Then, deliberately, we put them back. Leave the chairs, I said. Let them say it. Theo raised an eyebrow. That's a little dramatic for you. It was. I'm not usually a dramatic person. But some things deserve a witness, even an empty one. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in months, and I didn't yet understand why. 3 days later, I'd find out, when I finally opened a box I'd been hauling from apartment to apartment, unopened, for 3 years. It was an ordinary banker's box, the plain cardboard kind. It had survived 3 moves without me ever lifting the lid. I knew roughly what was inside, paperwork from the worst spring of my life, and I'd always meant to file it properly someday. I never had, because opening it meant going back to that parking garage. But the night before my wedding, sleep wouldn't come, and I found myself sitting cross-legged on the spare room floor with the lid in my lap. On top, a manila envelope, soft at the corners. Across the front, in my own handwriting from 3 years ago, farm important. I almost left it closed. I want you to understand how close I came to shelving it one more time. But my hands moved without asking permission, and I slid the pages out. A promissory note. A recorded lien. And beneath both, in a smaller envelope I'd completely forgotten existed, a letter in my grandfather's slanted handwriting, written the year before he passed. I read the first line and forgot to breathe for a second. I didn't read the rest that night. I just folded it all back into the envelope and held it against my chest in the dark, understanding that whatever happened at my wedding the next day, the real story was already sitting in my lap. I had no idea yet that everyone who'd skipped the ceremony was about to learn exactly what it said, the hard way. Saturday arrived gold and crisp, the kind of autumn day you'd order from a catalog if they let you. We married in a restored barn at a small vineyard 15 minutes out of town, string lights, hay bales, a quilt borrowed from Theo's grandmother draped over the rail. I won't pretend the empty chairs didn't hurt. They did. During the vows, I glanced out once and saw all 4 name cards fronting 4 folding chairs nobody occupied, and my throat closed for a moment. Then Theo said my name, and I came back to him. We laughed through our vows. I cried through his. My coworkers from the hospice filled 2 full rows, nurses who'd swapped shifts just to be there. The one aunt I actually liked drove 3 hours to watch me say I do. The room was full of people who had chosen to be there, and that's the strange gift of empty chairs. They make the full ones impossible to take for granted. We moved to the cake as the sun dropped low and orange. It was simple: lemon and elderflower, 2 tiers, and Theo's hand settled warm over mine on the knife, exactly the way it's supposed to. That's when my phone, tucked into my sash because I'd promised the photographer I'd keep it on me, began to buzz. I glanced down out of reflex. My mother's name. A text: call me. No. This is serious. 3 words I wouldn't actually read for hours, because the calls started stacking up right behind them, one after another, my phone shivering against my hip like something alive. My mother. My sister. My father's landline. My mother again. I silenced the ringer, slid the knife through lemon and elderflower, and kissed my husband. By the time we surfaced, the screen read 36 missed calls. I turned it face down on the table. Whatever it was, it had already waited this long. It could wait until the dancing was finished. I didn't listen to any of it until almost midnight, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in half my wedding makeup, Theo beside me while I put the phone on speaker. The first voicemail was my mother, an hour into Paige's party, her voice bright and brittle. "Renee, call me back the second you get this. It's important." The second, 20 minutes later, less bright. "Honey, where are you? We really need you. Please call." By the fifth, her voice had shifted entirely, that high, thin register I've only ever heard in hospital hallways, the sound of someone watching a plan disintegrate in real time. "You have to call me. You don't understand what's happening." Then Paige, somewhere in the middle, furious and wet. "I don't know what you did, but you ruined everything. Are you happy? Call Mom." I sat there in my wedding dress and felt an odd cocktail of emotions. Worry, because the nurse in me is always half-braced to run toward an emergency. And underneath it, something I wasn't proud of and wasn't ashamed of either: curiosity. Because I already had a fairly good idea what had happened at that party. I'd read enough of the envelope to guess. Whatever my parents had announced to a yard full of guests had apparently collided head-on with a piece of paper filed in a county office, and the sound of that collision had reached me through 36 phone calls. "You're not calling back tonight," Theo said. Not a question. No, I agreed. Tonight I'm dancing with my husband. But I do want the whole story first. If you've ever been the reliable one and still gotten left off the guest list, you already know that exact feeling. The worry and the strange calm, sitting side by side. I pieced together the truth over the next few days, mostly from my cousin's texts and one strange, halting voicemail from my father that I'll get to shortly. Picture it: Paige's engagement party, string lights strung across the backyard of the family farm, Tyler's parents in their good clothes, 60 guests holding plastic flutes. Around 4 in the afternoon, my mother stood on the porch steps and tapped a spoon against her glass. She gave a speech about family. About legacy. About things meant to be passed down through generations. And then, in front of everyone, she and my father announced their gift to the happy couple: the farmhouse. The land. My grandfather's land. A wedding present, free and clear, to help them start their lives together. The guests applauded. Tyler's mother teared up. Paige cried the pretty kind of crying. And somewhere inside that applause, Tyler's father, a careful man, I'm told, who reads things before he signs them, asked a careful man's question. Just to be sure, was the property free and clear? My mother, beaming, said of course it was. It had been in the family for generations. Except it wasn't. Not even close. There was a lien recorded at the county courthouse, filed 3 years earlier. And the name on it wasn't the bank's. It was mine. The daughter who wasn't at the party. The daughter whose wedding they'd all skipped in order to be there instead. The moment someone pulled up the county records on their phone, which, at a party full of curious people, takes about 90 seconds, my mother's beautiful gift turned into a very public, very documented problem, with my signature sitting at the bottom of it. Sunday morning, before I called anyone back, I sat at our kitchen table with Theo and opened the envelope the rest of the way. I want to lay out exactly what was inside, because I'd ask you to hold on to this for the rest of the story. First, a promissory note drawn up 3 years earlier by a lawyer named Priya Nair, stating that I, Renee Callahan, had loaned my parents, Walt and Diane Callahan, $84,000 to cure the default on the farm, plus $11,000 more in fees, $95,000 total. Signed by both of them. I remembered that day clearly. My father was still in rehab. My mother was frantic. I told her gently, "It's just a formality, so the family's protected." They signed without really reading it, the way people in crisis sign anything that promises to make the water stop rising. Second, the recorded lien, filed at the county courthouse, securing that loan against the property. In plain terms, the farm could not be sold, gifted, or transferred to anyone without the loan being settled first. The house was collateral, my collateral. Third, the letter from my grandfather, written the year before he died. I made myself read the whole thing that morning. He wrote about the land the way you'd write about a person. Near the end, one line I had to read twice. Land doesn't belong to whoever's loved the most. It stays with whoever keeps it alive. He'd underlined keeps it alive. I sat there, and the paper didn't care who my mother loved more. It didn't care about parties or empty chairs, or who got to be the headline. It only cared whose name was on the lien. And the name on the lien was mine. Theo, who builds things for a living and has a healthy respect for load-bearing walls, understood it before I even finished explaining. "So they tried to give away a house that's already promised to someone else," he said slowly. "Pledged," I said. "Collateral. They can't hand Paige clear title without paying me back first. $95,000 plus 3 years of interest, per the note." He let out a low whistle. Do they know? That was the real question. Did my parents genuinely understand, standing on that porch playing the generous king and queen, that the thing they were giving away wasn't fully theirs to give? I thought about it honestly. My mother had signed that note in a panic and then spent 3 years pretending the entire crisis had never happened, the way she pretended every inconvenient thing had never happened. I think she genuinely erased it. I think she remembered that Renee had helped somehow, in some vague, self-flattering way that never required her to actually feel indebted, and filed the whole thing under things daughters do and never thought about it again. So no, I don't think she knew. I think she stood up at that party, absolutely certain the farm was hers to bestow. And the certainty is what makes it almost unbearable, because she wasn't lying to Tyler's father. She believed it. She had loved Paige so loudly for so long that she'd quietly written my entire sacrifice out of the family's story, and the county courthouse, which keeps far better records than my mother's memory, had written it right back in. "What are you going to do?" Theo asked. I looked at the 3 documents fanned across our kitchen table on the first morning of our marriage. "I'm going to make sure the paper still says what it says," I told him. "And then I'm going to let them tell me the rest. I need to back up, because if I don't, you'll assume I'm someone who plots revenge 3 years in advance. I'm not. Here's what actually happened. 3 years earlier, while my father was still in rehab, I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister. She didn't know I was in the next room. She was talking about the farm, about how once Walt was back on his feet, maybe they could refinance it, pull some equity out, because Paige is going to need help someday, a wedding, a house. You know how she is, she can't manage on her own the way Renee can. Pull equity out of the exact farm I was about to empty my entire savings account to save. I stood in that hallway and felt the floor tilt. I had just decided to give away everything I had, and my mother was already quietly strategizing how to leverage it later for the daughter she actually worried about. So the next day, I called a lawyer, not to trap anyone, not out of spite, but to protect the farm, and honestly, to protect myself, because I finally understood that in my family, a promise was written in disappearing ink. I told Priya I wanted to help my parents, but I needed it documented, properly recorded, so the land couldn't quietly be borrowed against or handed away later without the debt being honored. She told me it was the smartest thing someone in my position could do. I still felt guilty doing it, cold, calculating, like I was accusing my own family of something. I almost didn't file the lien. I did anyway. And for 3 years, I felt vaguely ashamed of that decision. Turns out I hadn't accused them of anything they didn't eventually do, in front of 60 witnesses on my wedding day. By Sunday afternoon, the texts had changed flavor. The pleading was gone. The blame had arrived. Paige led the charge. You ruined my engagement party. Tyler's parents think we're frauds. Call mom right now. Then my mother. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I read them at the kitchen table and noticed something almost funny. Not one of them asked how my wedding had gone. Not one of them said congratulations. They had skipped the entire event, and now the only acknowledgement that it had even happened was an accusation that I'd somehow sabotaged their party from 15 minutes away. The story had already rewritten itself inside their heads. I was the villain. I'd done something. The fact that I'd been standing at a cake table the whole time, that I hadn't lifted a finger, that the only thing I'd actually done was exist as a creditor 3 years earlier. None of that seemed to matter. My mother's old line drifted back to me. A wedding's just a party. Family is about who actually shows up. I almost texted it back to her. I didn't. But I sat with it, turning it over, because it had curdled into something she never intended it to mean. She'd been right in the end. Family is about who shows up. And 3 years ago, when the farm was 90 days from the auction block, exactly one person had shown up with everything she had, and that person hadn't been invited to the celebration of the thing she'd saved. I put the phone down without answering anyone. I had one stop to make first, and it wasn't the farm. Marcus Delgado had handled the farm's loan paperwork for 15 years, and he was the one who'd processed the lien when Priya filed it. I made an appointment for Monday morning, not to plot anything, but because before this went any further, I needed to know the ground under me was solid. In nursing, you check the chart before you act. You don't run on assumption. Marcus is careful and kind, somewhere in his 60s, reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead. He remembered me. He pulled the file while I sat across the desk. It's all in order, he said, sliding the recorded lien toward me. Filed correctly 3 years ago. Properly secured against the parcel. He looked at me over his glasses. I'll be honest, I got 2 calls this weekend. Your mother, and a gentleman I believe was Tyler's father, both asking me to explain the encumbrance on the property. My stomach tightened. What did you tell them? The truth, he said simply. That the property has a lien held by you, that it can't transfer clean until the debt's satisfied, and that any title company would find it in an afternoon. I didn't editorialize. I don't have to. The record speaks for itself. I asked whether my parents could undo any of it without my involvement. He shook his head. Not without your signature releasing it. The lien is yours, to release or to enforce. I drove home knowing exactly where I stood, which is a rare and steadying feeling. I wasn't going to ambush anyone. I wasn't going to enforce anything cruel. But I also wasn't going to sign away the one piece of paper in my entire life that proved, in plain language, that I had mattered. My mother tried a new approach on Tuesday. Anger hadn't worked, so she reached for the older tool, the one that had run our family for 3 decades. Guilt. Her voice on the phone was soft now, wounded. The voice of a woman who had only ever wanted the best for everyone. Renee, honey, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I think we can fix it as a family. I said I was listening. When you helped us with the farm, that was such a generous thing. Such a loving thing. And I know you never meant for it to become some kind of, legal hold over us. That's not who you are. A pause, letting that settle. I think the kindest thing, the thing that would really show everyone you're not bitter about the party, would be to just sign the release. Let us give Paige her start. Feet. After everything we did for you, you'd really do this to your own sister? There it was. After everything we did for you. I sat there and actually let myself inventory it, since she'd invited me to. They'd raised me, yes. And in that same house, they had also taught me, every single day, that my role was to provide and Paige's role was to receive. That my love was infrastructure and Paige's was the headline. That a wedding was just a party. Mom, I said calm and level. I'm not bitter about the party. That part was true. But I'm not signing away $95,000 so you can give Paige a house and the reason still exists. A sharp intake of breath. So this is about the money. No, Mom. It was never about money. You're the one who made it about a house. I ended the call gently. Paige showed up at my apartment Wednesday night, something she had never once done in the 3 years I'd lived there. She didn't know which buzzer belonged to me. That detail told its own story. When I let her in, she was somewhere between furious and panicked, and underneath both of those, something I hadn't expected. Fear. "Tyler's freaking out," she said before she'd even sat down. "His parents think we lied to them. His dad keeps asking about the lien. Why there even is a lien. And Tyler keeps looking at me like I knew." "Did you know?" I asked. "Of course I didn't know," she snapped. "Nobody tells me anything. Mom just said the house was ours to give." She started pacing my small living room. "Why do you even have a lien on the farm? Who does that to their own family?" I could have loaded every line I had. Instead, I told her the truth, plainly, the way you deliver news someone should have gotten years earlier. "Paige, 3 years ago, the bank was about to take the farm. Dad was in the hospital. I emptied my entire savings, $95,000, to save it. I did it on paper so it couldn't be quietly borrowed against or handed away later without being paid back. That's what a lien is." She stopped pacing. I watched the number land on her, watched her try to fit it against the version of me she'd carried her whole life. The reliable one, the one who never needs anything. "You never said anything," she said, quieter now. "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She sat down on the edge of my couch, and for the first time in years, my sister looked at me like a person instead of an appliance. "Tyler's going to want to slow everything down," she said finally. "Yeah," I said. "He probably is." My father called Thursday on the landline, which is how I knew it was really him and not my mother dialing on his behalf. His speech still slurs slightly on the left side since the stroke, so when Walt calls, he means it. "Renee," he said, "it's your dad." As if I wouldn't know. We sat in silence on the line for a moment. Then he said the most honest thing he'd said to me in 3 years. "I knew about the lien. I signed it." I remembered. His voice cracked. "Your mother forgot or made herself forget, but I never did. I let her stand up at that party and give away your house. I knew, and I let her, because it was easier than telling her the truth in front of everyone. I've been a coward since the stroke, Renee. Maybe before that too." I felt my eyes sting. This was the apology I'd wanted for 3 years, and it had finally arrived, and it was real. "Why, Dad?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because every time I look at you, I see the daughter who saved us, and I'm ashamed I ever needed saving." It was easier to look at Paige. She never had to see me weak. There it was, the whole sad architecture of it laid bare. Not malice. Shame, wearing the mask of favoritism. I sat with that. Then he said the thing that reminded me he was still, even now, my mother's husband. "So I'm asking you, as your father, sign the release. Let us fix this. Let me have some peace before I go." And I loved him, and I ached for him, and I said, "Dad, I'd give you almost anything. But not that. Not so it can be handed to Paige. If you want peace, we make this fair, out in the open." He sighed. I heard my mother's voice somewhere behind him. The call ended not long after. The invitation to a family meeting came Friday, formal as a court date. My mother wanted everyone at the farmhouse Sunday afternoon to settle this, like adults, together. She made a point of listing exactly who'd be there, aunts, uncles, my cousin Delia, and added, almost casually, that Tyler's parents would also be attending, so they can see we're a normal, loving family. I understood the move immediately. She wanted an audience. She wanted to seat me in a crowded room, surround me with relatives, cast me as the bitter daughter holding the family hostage, and apply enough collective pressure that I'd sign the release just to make the discomfort stop. It's an old trick. It works because most people will trade almost anything for the room to stop staring at them. She'd used it on me my whole life. The difference this time was that I was bringing my own paperwork to the performance. "I'll be there," I told her, and I could hear the surprise in her silence. She'd expected resistance, something she could label difficult. Instead, I said yes, and that unsettled her more than a no ever would have. I spent Saturday making copies. The promissory note, the recorded lien, my grandfather's letter, though I decided I'd only read that one aloud if the moment called for it. I sealed them all in a plain manila envelope, the same kind that had carried them for 3 years. Theo offered to come with me. I told him this was mine to walk into alone, and he understood, the way he always does. Sunday morning, I drove out down my grandfather's gravel road with the envelope on the passenger seat, in the spot where a maid of honor should have been sitting a week earlier. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me. I think some part of me had been rehearsing for this room my entire life. The farmhouse living room was full when I stepped inside, arranged like a tribunal nobody would admit to staging. My mother sat center couch, my father beside her, looking smaller than I remembered. Paige perched on the arm. Tyler stood by the window, arms crossed. His parents sat stiffly in the two good chairs, his father watching everything with quiet attention. Aunts and uncles ringed the room. My cousin Delia gave me a small, nervous nod. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner, and somewhere a teacup clinked against its saucer. I stood just inside the doorway with my envelope and greeted everyone calmly. My mother began before I'd even found a seat, which told me she'd rehearsed it. "Renee, we're so glad you came. We wanted everyone here because family problems should be solved as a family." She turned to the room, her voice warming into performance. "I'll be honest because I think honesty matters most. My daughter is holding a legal claim over our family home, a claim she placed there secretly, and she's refusing to release it so her sister can have her wedding gift. I don't know where the daughter I raised went." She dabbed at her eye. "We gave Renee everything. And this is what she does." The room tilted toward me, every face rearranging itself into disappointment, exactly as she'd designed. An uncle muttered something about family loyalty. Tyler's father said nothing, but he was watching me, not my mother, and I noted it. I felt the pressure in the room like a physical weight on my sternum. The old familiar instruction, be smaller, be easier, sign the thing, make them stop looking at you. I felt my entire childhood pulling at me to fold. Then I felt the envelope in my hand, and I remembered I was no longer a child in that house. I was the woman who had kept it standing. I held my ground, and let the silence stretch through one more tick of the clock. "You're right, Mom," I said. "Honesty is best. So let's actually be honest." I walked to the coffee table at the center of the room and set the envelope down, unhurried. 3 years ago this spring, the bank sent a foreclosure notice on this farm. The mortgage was 90 days past due. The amount to bring it current, with fees, was $95,000. The room went still in a different way now. Dad was in the hospital. "Mom, you were beside yourself." And I was 31 years old with exactly $84,000 in savings, every dollar I'd earned working double shifts since nursing school. I slid the first page out. I gave it all, plus 11,000 more I borrowed to save this house. Not as some loan I shouted about, as a quiet thing on paper, so this farm could never be taken or given away without the debt being honored. I laid the promissory note down, my parents' signatures plain at the bottom. "You both signed this. You may have forgotten. The county didn't." I set the recorded lien beside it. My mother had gone pale. "Renee," she started. I kept my voice level and low, and somehow that quiet made the whole room lean in closer. "I'm not taking the house. I never wanted the house. I'm the reason there's still a house to give away in the first place." I looked directly at Tyler's father. "You asked Marcus Delgado about the lien. He told you the truth. It's real. It's mine. It's public record. I never hid it from anyone. My own family simply chose not to remember it." That's when my mother came apart. She rose off the couch, the wounded softness gone, her voice cracking through the room. "How dare you humiliate us in our own home, in front of everyone, after everything we sacrificed for you?" She was shaking. "You ungrateful, calculating girl. You did this to punish your sister." My aunt stared. Delia put a hand over her mouth. And I stood in the center of that storm and felt, for the first time in my life, completely calm. "I'm not punishing anyone, Mom," I said without raising my voice. "I'm just done pretending the paper doesn't say what it says." Tyler's father stood quietly and asked his son to step outside with him. Paige watched them go, and her face came apart. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The clock ticked. Then my cousin Delia, of all people, said softly into the silence, "She's the one who actually showed up." It landed like a struck bell, my mother's own words, the ones she'd used to rank a party above a wedding, turned all the way around and pointed straight back at her. 3 years earlier, when the farm sat 90 days from auction, exactly one person had shown up. And it hadn't been the daughter they'd thrown the party for. The uncle who'd muttered about loyalty a minute earlier was now looking at my mother very differently. So was everyone else. The room was reorganizing itself in real time, the actual facts finally replacing the performance. My mother felt it turning. She could always read a room, even while losing it. "After everything we did for you," she said again, weaker now, reaching for the line that had always worked. This time, I picked it up and handed it straight back. "After everything I did for this family, yes, I protected it from being given away in a speech I wasn't even invited to hear." Through the window, we could see Tyler and his father in the yard, Tyler's shoulders up around his ears. Paige sat frozen on the arm of the couch, and when she finally spoke, her voice had shrunk to almost nothing. "Why didn't anyone tell me she did that?" Nobody answered. The answer was the entire shape of our family, and everyone in that room had helped build it, one silence at a time. My father reached over and took my mother's hand, not exactly to comfort her, but to stop her. And for once, she let herself be stopped. I picked my grandfather's letter up off the table, the one I hadn't read aloud, and held it a moment, then slid it back into the envelope. "Some things you keep for yourself." The room had heard enough truth for one afternoon. I didn't want to leave that house as a victor standing over the defeated. That was never what any of this was for. So before I walked out, I offered something better than a weapon. "Here's what I'll do," I said to the whole room, but really to my parents. "I'm not releasing the lien for free, and I'm not letting this farm be gifted to anyone over a debt I'm still owed. But I don't want the house, and I don't need to be repaid in a check none of you actually have. So, we get the property appraised, independently. Everything goes on the table. What it's worth. What I'm owed. What's fair. If Paige and Tyler want a future here, there's an honest way to build it, with everyone's name on the paper this time in the open." I looked at my mother. No more speeches. No more surprises. Just the truth, written down where it can't be forgotten again. It wasn't a punishment. It was the opposite. It was the fairness our family had never once managed to produce on its own. My mother didn't thank me. I hadn't expected her to. But my father met my eyes and nodded, slow and certain, and I think that single nod cost him more and meant more than anything he'd said to me over the phone. I picked up my envelope, said goodbye to the aunts, to Delia, walked out through the kitchen where I'd done my homework as a girl, out the screen door that still stuck exactly the way it had for 30 years. I got into my car, rolled the windows down, and for the first time in that house's history, I was the one driving away while everyone else stayed behind to sit with what they'd done. In the weeks that followed, Paige and Tyler postponed their wedding. His parents, the careful kind, wanted time to understand exactly which family they were marrying into, and honestly, I don't blame them. Paige was furious with me for a while. Then one day, she wasn't anymore. She called, not in a panic, just to talk, and asked if I really worked doubles for years to build that savings account. I told her yes. She went quiet. Then she said, "I'm sorry I never actually knew you. Not I'm sorry I missed your wedding. Something bigger than that. We're still not close, my sister and I. Maybe we never will be. But we're honest now, which is more than we ever managed before." The farm was appraised by an independent firm. We all sat down together, Priya Nair and Marcus Delgado at the table with us, and put the real numbers in real light. My parents agreed to refinance properly, repay what they owed with interest, and put the farm's future in writing, with every child's name visible on the document. Paige's start, if she still wants one, will be built on paper anyone can read, not on a gift that quietly erased her sister. My mother and I talk less now, and what we do say is smaller and truer. She has never once apologized, not really, and I've made my peace with the possibility that she never will fully understand what she did. Some people can't survive looking in that particular mirror. But she has stopped calling me only when something is on fire. That's not nothing. My father comes by the apartment every couple of weeks now. He sits at our kitchen table, Theo makes him coffee, and he tells the same worn stories about my grandfather, and I let him, because I finally understand his coldness was never about loving me less. It was about never forgiving himself for needing me. Marisol texted an apology a month later. Long, careful, clearly rewritten more than once. I read it twice. I haven't answered yet. Maybe I will. But I've learned something in the meantime. You can love someone for 19 years and still notice the exact day they showed you where you rank. As for me, I'm a married woman now. I kept every photograph from that wedding, including the one of 4 empty chairs standing in a row, and I don't find it sad anymore. I find it clarifying. Those chairs told me a truth my whole family had spent 30 years talking around. The cake was lemon and elderflower, and it was delicious, and the room was full of people who chose me. I think about that more than I think about who didn't come. The reliable daughter spent her whole life believing that if she just carried enough, she'd eventually become the headline. She was wrong. She never needed to be the headline. She just needed to finally set the suitcase down. Being the one who holds everything together doesn't mean you owe everyone your silence forever. And it never meant you owed anyone the right to forget what you carried. If your family only calls when they need something, you're allowed to stop answering. And you're allowed to let the truth speak louder than the apology you may never get.